if you imagine an America that had no partisanship and no left right bitter rivalries and hatreds, we would basically still be left with this problem of we want our elections to be secure. We want to make sure that no one's, voting who isn't allowed to vote. We want to make sure that Russians aren't hacking our voting systems. We want to be confident that the election is not fraudulent, that the election is real. And at the same time, we want it to be easy to vote. No one wants to be stuck in line for even 20 minutes and to say nothing of 30 minutes to an hour in order to vote, right? So we want elections to be both secure and easy. So you send that, which would be a challenge, just a logistical challenge in any country at any time, into a situation where we have the highest level of bitter partisanship in the past 50 years at least. It's like the polls on whether Democrats want their kids to marry someone of the other party and vice versa are shocking, right? Like the
It's
level of
shocking.
hatred is shocking, and the level of wanting to win at all costs is shocking as well. And so that adds a whole new dimension to this problem of voting. And we've obviously seen, we're coming out of 2020 where Donald Trump made really tried his darndest to actually overturn the elections, pulling out every stop he could, and was unsuccessful in doing that, but did manage to persuade a huge chunk of the base that the election was stolen. And so that's pretty much where we sit. And so I read your book, and I'll put my cards on the table here. There's a lot of the way you frame this issue, I think, that there's going to be some distance between us in terms of, I really, in a big picture way, I came away from your book thinking, here's how you frame it, basically. It's kind of like the last scene in The Karate Kid where the Cobra Kai instructor is telling his guy to sweep the leg and win at all costs. And then Daniel-san and Mr. Miyagi they just want to fight fair, right? And then we all celebrate because the good guys win. That seemed to be kind of the characterization of Republicans and Democrats in your book, in terms of Republicans are fighting dirty, pulling at all the stops, making it harder for people of color to vote. And Democrats are more or less fighting fair. Whereas my view of the situation is that it's basically a street fight. And they're all fucking scumbags. And they will do anything to win. They will pass policies that they perceive to benefit them, or at minimum to be neutral to them. And so that's, I think, the big picture, maybe the big picture daylight between us. I'm curious if that jogs anything in you. Like, what is the crisis as you see it? What's the big picture as you see it?
Yeah, I think that's really smart. Anytime I'm compared to the Karate Kid, even in insults, take that as a compliment. Love it. But I actually think, it's worth thinking about what each side is trying to do here and like what their motivations are. So I'm not convinced that this is remotely as black and white as that portrayal of the book sits. And I think that becomes much clearer when you get into the specific policies. But I think that if you just look in terms of basic incentives, put morality aside, Democrats believe, true or false, we can get into this, that when more people vote, they're going to win more elections. And Republicans believe, as Trump said, I think before 2020, that if you let everyone vote, we'd never win an election again. Mm-hmm. That's the mentality from both parties. We've probably talked about this offline. I think the whole idea that demography is destiny is ridiculous from Democrats. I think that Republicans actually do a lot better when there's certain types of expansions to access to the ballot. A lot of 2020 hinged on mail-in ballots, a lot of that debate. And It's common sense when you actually take a second to think about mail-in ballots. Like, who wants to mail in their ballot? Who needs to mail in their ballot? Predominantly older voters who happen to be in greater numbers white and happen to be in greater numbers Republican. So like if this were truly just like a partisan street fight, you'd think the Republicans would be the ones fighting to expand access to mail-in ballots across the country. And you'd think Democrats would be opposed to it. But there is this weird ideological thing that sort of sets up each party's view of this issue, which is that Democrats fundamentally believe that more people voting is better, and Republicans fundamentally believe that more people voting is worse for them. I happen to come from a first principles place here, where in general, I think security considerations are obviously important, but on net, I'm going to lean towards the side of just letting more people vote. And so I think that Democrats here are on the virtuous side, but I don't think it's because of any innate virtuosity. I think it's because pragmatically, Democrats think that if this is a fair fight, they're going to win these elections. I'm not sure that that's true.
All right, so we should linger here because we're speaking a few weeks after the white supremacist Buffalo shooting, and a few days after the horrifying mass shooting of children in Texas. But because this has been in the news recently, I think this notion of demography is destiny, we should linger on this, right? The Buffalo shooter, in his manifesto, his core driving concern, which is not to legitimate it, but just to describe it, was that basically people of color are pouring into the country who are going to vote Democrat, going to change the character of the country in ways that the European descended quote unquote core of the country will never be able to recover from. That white people will forever be outnumbered, and they have to act now or lose their country, right? And this has been going by the name of great replacement theory, the idea that white people are being replaced in this country. And as you noted, it seems that basically lots of Democrats and lots of Republicans agree with the empirical prediction here, which is to say you have lots of Democrats, you have lots of intellectuals that for 20 years on the left have been saying the way for Democrats to win is just to get more people of color, more immigrants into the country, and they're going to vote for us. We don't have to change our policies. We don't have to pander to the centrists and the independents. And then you have people on the far right saying, well, yeah, that's what's going to happen, and that's why we need a wall, and that's why we need to reduce immigration. And Yasha on this podcast a few weeks ago made the point, which you hinted at agreeing with, which is it's really not so black and white, because as we saw between 2016 and 2020, Trump got a higher percentage of the Latino vote, a higher percentage of the black vote. Many immigrants and people of color have socially conservative opinions and are quite up for grabs as voters. A lot of people simply vote on their tax rate, which often will favor the Republican Party. A lot of business owners are single issue voters, regardless of their skin color. So what can you say about the wider fears of sort of great replacement and changing demographics?
So I think beyond the obvious aspects of this that can be false equivalent, where this guy took to violence and committed a heinous crime no one's in support of, I think the fundamental false equivalence of these two arguments is the great replacement argument or replacement theory argument, for many of its most vocal supporters, is predicated on a belief that the existing American culture, a culture shaped largely by whiteness, as this theory describes it, is somehow superior to the culture that would be coming in, or that immigration writ large is changing America in ways that they're not supportive of. And so the takeaway from that is sort of like a normative claim that is in the vein of white supremacy, in that if you look at a lot of the people who talk about it, they're framing it as this battle of cultures fundamentally. On the other side, I think, first of all, that I do genuinely believe that it's on the level that Democrats, cosmopolitans, people who live in cities, just like the people who are making these policies, tend to actually just like immigration more. Like, I don't think this is like some Trojan horse to win more elections. Like, I just like know people in politics. I think that no matter what you personally think of immigration or what anyone thinks, I don't think that this is some like Machiavellian scheme to win every election forever, to open borders. I think, if that were the case, it's suspicious why Biden has taken so long to get rid of some of the pandemic policies having to do with immigrants, why there were more immigrants detained under President Obama in his first term than in Trump's first term. Like there's all these different stats that indicate that Democrats, if this were their intent, are doing like a pretty horrible job of increasing immigration towards this end. I think that where I find the demography is destiny theory to be not just wrong and tactically wrong in terms of winning elections, because I think Democrats have to continue to persuade people, but also substantively and morally wrong, is that I think it just strips agency of millions and millions and millions of people, cultures that are incredibly diverse, whose politics are incredibly diverse. It also erases the ability of groups to change their politics over time, as has happened throughout American history again and again and again and again. So I think both theories are basically junk, but one is essentially like a clash of civilizations type theory where you can understand how it leads to violence if you believed in it. And the other, I think, is mostly like an observant wishful thinking from liberals that doesn't actually accord with their policy preferences and is fundamentally just messed up in the way that it flattens entire groups of incredibly diverse people.